Perfect. Dear friends, may peace be with you. And I'll say once again, for those in-house and those joining us remotely, may peace be with you. I can tell that somebody sent out a memo this week to come join for in-person worship this week. We've got a lot of, hey, haven't seen you in a while energy in the room, which is really fun to see, especially here in the late Sunday days of July. It is a joy to be together. Welcome one and all. My name is Brennan. I'm one of the pastors here at St. Luke, where together we are a joyful, inclusive, compassionate community, together on a spiritual journey to do justice, make peace, and walk humbly with our God. We are continuing along in our summer worship series together called Poems of Power. In person, you will find a collection of poems along the wall of our sanctuary that have been submitted by members and friends of this congregation. These are poems that speak to and inspire us, and today we continue that series with a set of poems focusing on the losses that find and teach us. What happens when love makes an impact upon our lives and then leaves a deep impression in its wake. I'll be exploring that in a dialogue today with Evelyn Hayden. Evelyn, thank you for joining us. I also want to take a moment to welcome back the Elliott family from their week of staycation. Yay, it's nice to see you with us. I think Nora's still officially away, so say hi to her in a personal capacity, but don't say hi to her in a professional capacity. And if you're having trouble distinguishing between the two, ask Nora. Good luck. Yeah, well, you're welcome. Glad to have you back. All right, dear friends, with that in mind, let us take a moment to transition from the joy of getting here to the gift of being here together. I'll invite us to take a deep breath. And then before we join into our centering poem, or into our centering song, we'll have a gathering poem. So Nicole, if you'd come join us to read Ascension.
Our gathering poem is Ascension by Colleen Cora Hitchcock. And if I go while you're still here, know that I live on, vibrating to a different measure, behind a veil you cannot see through. You will not see me, so you must have faith. I wait for the time when we can soar together again, both aware of each other. Until then, live life to its fullest. When you need me, just whisper my name in your heart. I will be there.
I will sing a phrase and just sing it right back. And when I rise, and when I let me rise like a bird, joyfully. And when I fall, let me fall like a leaf, joyfully, without regret. And when I rise, let me rise like a bird, joyfully. And when I fall, let me fall like a leaf, joyfully, without regret. We invite you into a few moments of silence.
Our opening blessing is Blessing for Coming Home to an Empty House by Jan Richardson. I know how every time you return, you call out in greeting to the one who is not there. How you lift your voice, not in habit, but in honor of the absence so fierce it has become its own force. I know how the hollow of the house echoes in your chest, how the emptiness you enter matches the ache you carry with you always. I know there are days when the only thing more brave than leaving this house is coming back to it. So on those days, may there be a door in the emptiness through which a welcome waits for you. On those days, may you be surprised by the grace that gathers itself within this space. On those days, may the delight that made a home here find its way to you again, not merely in memory, but in hope, so that every word ever spoken in kindness circles back to meet you, so that you may hear what still sings to you within these walls, so that you may know the love that dreams with you here when finally you give yourself to rest, the love that rises with you, stubborn like the dawn that never fails to come.
I invite you to rise in body or spirit as we sing our opening hymn.
Our scripture this morning is 2 Corinthians 4, 6 through 10. For it is the God who said, "Light will shine out of darkness," who has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Christ. But we have this treasure in clay jars, so that they may be made clear that this extraordinary power belongs to God and does not come from us. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed, always carrying around in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be made visible in our bodies. And an excerpt of a poem, Kindness, by Naomi Shia Nye. Before you know kindness as the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing. You must wake up with sorrow. You must speak to it till your voice catches the thread of all sorrows, and you see the size of the cloth. Then it is only kindness that makes sense anymore. Only kindness that ties your shoes and sends you out into the day, to mail letters and purchase bread. Only kindness that raises its head from the crowd to say, "It is I you have been looking for," and then goes with you everywhere like a shadow or a friend.
Thank you, Nicole. So this will be a dialogue sermon. I'm going to welcome St. Luker, Evelyn Hayden, to come forward to join us here. And as Evelyn makes her way up, though, I'll simply note here at the top that this sermon is going to function as a bit of a continuation of last week's reflection on love. So if you were able to take that in, wonderful. You have the prelude. If not, this is a good chance to go back and watch a previously recorded worship service here at St. Luke. In that service, we reflected on love as a process of opening ourselves to the world and to others, even when it comes with the risk of being hurt when we experience loss or disappointment. If love is an opening of the self to the world, then today we will explore how sorrow is an honoring of just how much love we were able to let in while we did that. When we bless and honor the sorrow that comes with loss, what we do is recognize and honor the love that has found a home in our hearts. And today we will honor that we do that not only as human beings, but we do that in a special way as the church. That is something that we have committed to doing with and for each other. And so with that, Evelyn and I will have a conversation about what that looks like throughout different stages of life. So, Evelyn, there we go.
See if mine's
Thank
on.
you for your willingness to join me in this conversation here. As a simple beginning for our time together, I'm wondering if you could tell us about the poem, or in this case, the blessing, that you selected for our summer series, and why this poem speaks to you. Why the choice?
Okay, the poem I chose is Beannacht, which is Gaelic for blessing, and you have a copy of it in your bulletin. You also have a reference to a link online, and what's really lovely is to hear it read by John O'Donoghue. He has this, beautiful Irish Gaelic accent, and you can find it on that link. So I first heard this, I don't know, years ago, I think. It was written many moons ago, and then I've heard Brennan use it a couple of times at least, maybe in memorial services. And, well, for one thing, I admit I was an English major, and I love poetry, and just the music of the words, it just captures me. And I would like it for that alone, but I also think that it's, I'll read it, and you can see what meaning it has for you. Oh, and I should add, the first time I ever read this or heard it, I had to look up currach. I had no idea what that was. That's a little boat that they use in West Ireland, have for, I think, centuries. It's usually small. It's made of like a wood frame, and then used to cover it with hides. Now they cover it with canvas and tar the canvas. So it's a fairly fragile boat, but it works really well, in that area, and others as well. And you can see pictures of it online if you care to look. So here's Beannacht. On the day when the weight deadens on your shoulders and you stumble, may the clay dance to balance you. And when your eyes freeze behind the gray window and the ghost of loss gets into you, may a flock of colors, indigo, red, green, and azure blue, come to awaken in you a meadow of delight. When the canvas frays in the currach of thought and a stain of ocean blackens beneath you, may there come across the waters a path of yellow moonlight to bring you safely home. May the nourishment of the earth be yours. May the clarity of light be yours. May the fluency of the ocean be yours. May the protection of the ancestors be yours. And so may a slow wind work these words of love around you, and invisible cloak to mind your life.
Thank you for sharing that, Evelyn. This is a blessing that I know and have shared before, as you mentioned, so it's one I've always enjoyed. And I have always loved the image of those last few lines of that blessing, this notion of love wrapping around you as this invisible cloak to mind your life. I think that of the deep love that we all strive to feel with family, with deep friendships, with our God. And I love that image of an ever-present embrace. I'm curious, though, in the context of today. So I spend a lot of time as pastor working with you all, connecting with you all in times and spaces of grief. And while I've experienced loss in my own life, I've never lost someone that has been particularly close to me. My dad died when I was younger, though that was a pretty distant relationship. And I was reflecting on the words that Jan Richardson had in the opening blessing. She describes an absence so fierce it becomes its own force. And I'm mindful that many of you may know exactly what she's talking about in a way that I haven't quite felt directly yet. And Evelyn, I was really humbly glad when you said yes to this invitation, because I know that you have experienced some deep loss in your own life with both a partner and a daughter. And so I am wondering how these words, this image of this cloak that is enfolding you, is that something that you feel in the absence of a loved one, this comforting weight, or is it more of an absence than an embrace? How has that image kind of changed for you as you've gone through your own grieving and remembering?
It's a hard question to untangle those feelings because there are so many. And particularly when grief is new, it feels very heavy indeed, just weighs on you. And as time goes by, that physical feeling of weight lifts, you still have the absence. And it's really interesting. This is totally an aside, but when I woke up yesterday morning, I thought, oh, it's July 23rd. That date rings a bell. I wonder if it's somebody's birthday. And I thought, oh, that was my anniversary. So this is after nearly 5 years since my spouse died. That no longer has the same impact. I mean, I barely remembered the date. It was a little embarrassing, actually. Of course, if you know how absent-minded I am, it's not hard to believe. But some of you know my family history, and I'll just give you the nutshell version. My dad came back from World War II, stayed briefly, and went off to greener pastures, so he was always absent in my life, except for maybe once every 5 years. I'd see him for a few days. We got to be friends when I was an adult, but when he died, it was like, maybe like you, I don't know. I was sad he died, but he had a long life. He lived almost to 81, and we'd never been, well, you get the idea. Now, when my mother died, that was a different story because it was just she and I through all those growing up years. And I had just turned 23 when she died. So I really felt that one. I was, feeling pretty bereft. However, Dick and I had just gotten married 6 months previously, and we were living in Alaska. So even that, was somewhat distant in that sense. I hadn't lived at home since I left for college. And then the thing is, as you all know, it depends so much on the type of death. So we're not going to speak here about the ones that are sudden or, suicides are really, really difficult. These kids get shot in North Minneapolis. Those are totally other experiences, which we'll leave for another discussion. The ones I'm talking about today were people to whom I was really close. So my parents both died of cancer, as did various aunts and uncles. On Dick's side, which we didn't know when we were having kids, there was myotonic muscular dystrophy, which is a genetic disease. So a whole bunch of people on his side of the family had it. We didn't even know it until our children were a little older. So the long and the short of that one is he lost, all three of the children had it. It's a 50-50 crapshoot, really, whether you get it or not, but he and his two sisters. Anyway, so it can be from very mild to very severe. Our youngest daughter, Elizabeth, realized when she was about 19 that she had it, there are signs, and by then we knew what to look for. My husband was very lucky. He had it on the mild end, and so he didn't really start showing symptoms till he was in his 60s. And those of you who knew him probably saw kind of that decline as he could no longer, walk up to the risers and stuff like that. So that was very different too. So you have a disease or you have a disability, and that changes the way things are. So oftentimes there's a relief when that person is no longer alive because their quality of life was going to be only worse. And so that helps temper the grief somewhat. But especially in the case of a spouse, because you're used to sharing the breakfast table and the conversations, and it's by the time you're retired, almost every minute of every day. So that felt really empty. And that's where that cloak, many of you, most of you here probably were with me through that whole time. To be accepting of the tears, to give hugs when there were no words, to remember to invite me. I'm not going to mention names because I don't want to embarrass you, but some of you were really, really good about, come have coffee, or, just something to make you feel. And Judy alluded to the community of love last week. And truly, without a community of love, whether it's your church or your whomever, I don't know how you get through it, because the beginning days, weeks, months are really, really difficult. There's no getting around it.
Evelyn, can I interject a question here? I'm just
Absolutely.
mindful. So when you're in the midst of that loss and you're receiving invitations from some of these folks, I think a lot of us has been in a case where, gosh, we know that someone is grieving the loss of a spouse or a child, and maybe find ourselves in that tricky position of, I don't know, do we disturb them? Would Evelyn like to hear from, would she like to be asked to coffee or tea? Or is it better to leave her alone? And when folks were reaching out to you, how did you experience that? Or do you have any wisdom for folks who might find themselves kind of in that position of, gosh, I want to say something, but I don't know what to say. Does she want company? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. And of course, the other thing is that, as you probably know, every person grieves differently. So that also changes the mix. So for me, you're already thinking about it. I know sometimes, if I mention it, they'll think about it. Well, trust me, they're thinking about it. And if they're not ready for being social, they'll tell you so. They'll just say, well, no thanks, not right now. That's not too difficult. And as far as words, it was funny. I live at Folkestone, as you know, which is a senior community, and we have scads of widows there. So the first people I ran into, that was true after my daughter died and after my husband died, they don't try to talk to you. They just welcome you with open arms and give you a big warm embrace. And I thought that was just perfect, So for me, that was good. And I tend to be an introvert, so I know you won't believe that, but it's true. So I could stay in my apartment if I wanted to, but I still went to exercise class, et cetera, et cetera. And I know one of the employees once said, I think it's great that you're getting out. And I know at least one other person that shares that feeling. And I said, well, I could stay in my apartment and mope, but what would be the point? I'm better off just getting out and moving around and being with people and having activities. And that, by the way, is an advantage of a senior living community. You can't hole up in your house for too long. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but for me it was very reassuring, very comforting.
It's interesting to kind of pair those back to back. We started this conversation around the embrace, and then you talked about the feeling of absence in the midst of their loss, and then you just mentioned, early on, it's not even words, it's folks who just enfold you with a hug.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking about that image side by side, the feeling of an absence, and then the gift of a hug, even without words. And I imagine that was, special and needed, just to have that feeling of touch. And I think we live in a society where we now rightly talk about consent and appropriate touch, absolutely. But we also know that touch there's a really healing aspect to it. And I think, when done with respect and mutuality and across friends, touch, a hug, that gift of presence even without words. I mean, this whole summer series is about words, but in sometimes it's not words, it's just presence or a hug.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would backtrack just a little bit, and I would say, because a lot of people have said, oh, to lose a child must be the hardest thing. Well, yes and no. Again, it depends on the situation. If it's a young child and they are with you day in and day out, of course. Excuse me. In my case with Elizabeth, we hadn't been in the same household for quite a few years. So our day-to-day lives were not entwined. And so that was hard in a different way, just the idea of losing a child. But if it's a child that you rarely see and you're not part of their day-to-day life, it's a whole different feeling again. And the same, the man she was married to for 10 years until she died, just died this past spring, age 47. She was 40 when she died. And I felt really bad because he had just been married for less than a year, and I felt so sorry for his wife. But again, I didn't see Dan. He came for Dick's funeral, but otherwise, we'd text occasionally or do online, but, I wasn't close to him. So again, it had a different feel. And again, you all have different situations, and you all know how it's been for you and how it affects you. So it's so individual. It's like you meet one grieving person, one grieving person. On the other hand, there is, sort of an overreaching generality that is maybe more widely applicable.
It's interesting. It reminds me, in some ways, the very early days of the pandemic. It felt like everyone was so scared and grieving the loss of companionship. And it was, I think, in my professional career and personal life, it was the first time that I think mental health and the experience of grief was just so salient across the board. But of course, while a lot of us, walk around and carry a smile, many of us carry grief with us every single day, or even the memory of grief. That's been there a long time, and it is something that unites us. And I'm curious, Evelyn, you have served as a befriender in the life of this church. You've served as a deacon. I'm sure you've served at many things in many churches, being married to a pastor as well for many years. I'm curious, as you kind of go about the world now, as someone who has experienced, like I said, we all experience loss, but you have felt loss of some folks who are really close to you. Do you find yourself approaching others who are grieving in different ways? Or do you have kind of new, gifts in your backpack or toolbox that you take with you?
Yes, I would say absolutely. And the same is true of having had cancer. So many people don't want to talk about it. They don't want to bring it up to you. They don't know how you respond. And I was lucky enough to have good friends who did not back away and invited me to talk. So after I recovered, this was 2008, for those of you who weren't around then, so I've been very fortunate. I felt much more comfortable approaching people. Some of the Presbytery people know Judy Kowitz. I can mention her name now. She has since passed away. But she had ovarian cancer, and it was like stage 4 when they discovered it. So many people didn't know what to say, and I said, hey, Judy, let's have lunch. So we got together once every month or two and had lunch. And I could name at least one other person from this congregation, the same thing, where I wasn't afraid to talk about cancer anymore. And I had a little bit of an idea, even though, again, each one's different, but some sense of how that is and how isolated you can feel. And so I feel the same way about grief. Befriender training is fabulous. I'd done a lot of grief work when I worked in the schools. Technically, I had a lot of information in my head, but I have to say it's different when you're the one that's experiencing it. But yeah, I think it makes you much more comfortable just to be open. And I wanted to mention a couple of books. There's a little series that's put out by his name is Kenneth Hauk, who founded the Stephen Ministries, which is very similar to Befrienders. And if we don't already have it in the library, Julie, I'd love to, buy the series. We have room for them. They're skinny. And this came from Folkestone, and Lou Frank told me that she got copies of it from Little Hospice after her husband died. So it's great. It just has little snippets, like this much on a page, which is about what you can take in when grief is new. But it says Finding Hope and Healing, and there's 3 in this series. Really, really recommend them. And there's another one in our library downstairs, which I found in the self-help section, called Living When a Loved One Has Died by Earl Grolman. And it's an old book, 77. But his name, he's like a, I don't know, patriarch, I guess you'd say, sort of like Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, in the grief literature. And it's really good. And again, he just has little tidbits, because you don't take in a lot initially. And I just read through some of it, and I mean, I'd love to just read you the book because it's great. But this is down in our library, so I recommend it highly. The other thing I want to say that's a copy down in our library on the Befriender shelf is The 5 Wishes. Some of you are familiar with this. I got copies of it years ago. In fact, I bought 25 copies and put some in the back of the sanctuary. Dick and I worked through it years ago, gave copies to all the girls, gave copies to all the befrienders, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a wonderful, the first 2 parts are the legal parts, and then it's all about what would you like when you're ill? How would you like to be treated? What would you like after you die in terms of service, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? It is really, really good. And let me tell you, from when my husband died, to have worked all this through in advance and with your children, if you have adult children, is fantastic. I mean, I cannot say that enough. Be prepared as you can be, and talk things through with your partner and whoever's going to make decisions, because when you're under stress and the person is dying in front of you, that's not a good time to be having this conversation. You need to have it ahead of time. So this is in our library, bottom shelf, Befrienders. Anyway.
Thank you. That was a good public service announcement. Amen. There's lots of other books on grief
Yes,
and
yes,
grieving,
there are.
loss and sorrow in the St. Luke Library.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Julie does a wonderful job of keeping it stocked down there.
So and I'll thank you for that PSA. I will say, as a working pastor, I do see firsthand and experience families who have talked about end-of-life issues and families who haven't. And it is very hard to navigate some of those decisions while you're trying to grieve or arrange for your sister-in-law to travel across the country and pick a memorial service date. It is a real blessing to talk some of that out ahead of time. It just makes space for the real feelings to then be. There's so much more I'd love to say and get into. I want to kind of honor the time here and the rest of the service. So I hope that this will be a conversation starter for many. I hope that if you have more questions, Evelyn is a fount of knowledge and experience, as you may have heard. But I want to end with one last question, which would be, for anyone out there who may be here or listening, who is in a space of deep grief and loss, or who may be on the edge of that experience, kind of waiting for that shoe to drop, what advice would you have kind of for them? Some of this stuff may be easier to hear where we're in an okay space. But when we feel like we're in a bit of a well, and we're feeling more absence than presence, are there any words that you would have to encourage them in that place as a first step?
Yeah, I think one of the things I found helpful, I did hospice work a few years ago for Hospice of the Twin Cities, and now again for Optage at Folkestone. But there are always grief groups available, and sometimes you have to try more than one. I tried one after Dick died, which didn't work for me at all. But when I was a volunteer in the bereavement area of hospice before, one of the women whom I have become friends with said, the great thing about this group is you don't have to explain anything. Everybody gets it. And that is really, really helpful. And there are good grief counselors. I brought one name with me that was recommended by Dick Oberg, for example. And if you're feeling stuck, or even if you're not, after a while, your friends get tired of hearing the same story over and over and over again, which is befrienders don't mind, and a grief counselor or grief group doesn't mind either. And for me, at least, I like to talk. Surprise. I found that very helpful. I think if you don't like groups, go to a grief counselor or do something. Talk to Brennan, talk to me, talk to somebody, because it helps so much just to be able to talk.
And that doesn't mean that you have to let go of your grief
No,
or
not at
change.
all.
It's not, those groups aren't about, we're going to help you get rid of your grief.
Right.
It's usually about, we're
Knowledge.
going to help give you space to honor your grief. Just to kind of wrap that up, as a closing thought, I just want to highlight again, Evelyn, you mentioned that so many folks here made that space available for you to be with you and honor your grief. And I know from working here for 5 years or so that you do that for so many others too. I've seen you do that just for so many
I
folks
hope.
here.
I hope.
And I simply give thanks for that and recognize that not every community space does that or has that, but that is part of our unique calling, to be here with and for each other in those times of loss, in times of grief. That can happen in other spaces, but there aren't many places where that happens intentionally, and where we come together to grieve and remember. And, I remember lighting I think it was my first All Saints Day here, we lit a candle for Dick Hayden, whom I had never met. But this community remembered. And it was clear that this community had been with you for that full year. And every year that I've been here, there are more and more saints that we honor and recognize, and I can see and remember now this person was loved. They are remembered. Their names are toasted when we have a columbarium happy hour out here in the courtyard. It's a real gift to be able to journey in these deep and sometimes hard spaces of life, because then we find that we're not alone. So I want to thank you, Evelyn, for sharing some of your story with us and this wonderful blessing from John O'Donohue.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, and I'll offer Evelyn's encouragement to listen to it later with that link in the bulletin. His Irish brogue is fantastic. So thank you, Evelyn, and that will wrap that conversation up here, or our conversation starter. And I'll invite folks to talk more with Evelyn or others afterward. David, I think that'll be you for our music offertory. Thank you again, Evelyn.
Good morning. So, the musical Falsettos was a groundbreaking show on Broadway. It was the first musical that told the love story between two men. It was about a man named Marvin, who at the beginning of the show was married to a woman and had a son, and found the courage to come out and found love. It's a wonderful, complicated, sometimes sarcastic, but loving relationship that he found. And towards the end of the show, his partner dies, and this is Marvin's response. What would I do if I had not met you? Who would I blame my life on? Once I was told that all men get what they deserve. Well, who the heck then threw this curve? There are no answers, but who would I be if you had not been my friend? You're the only one out of 1,000 others, only one my child would love. When I'm having fun, you're the one I want to talk to. Where have you been? Where are you now? Who would I be if I had not loved you? How would I know what love is? God only knows Too soon I'll remember your faults. Meanwhile, though it's tears and schmaltz, there are no answers. But what would I do if you had not been my friend? All my life I wanted men, and when I got it up to have them, who knew it could end your life? I left my kid and left my wife to be with you, to be insulted by such handsome men. Do I regret? I'd do it again. I'd like to believe that I'd do it again and again and again. And what more can I say? How am I to face tomorrow after being screwed out of today? Tell me what's in store. Yes, I'd beg or steal or borrow if I could hold you for 1 hour more, 1 hour more, 1 hour more, 1 hour, 1 hour more. What would I do if I had not seen you? Who would I feast my eyes on? Once I was told that good men get better with age. We're just gonna skip that stage. There are no answers. But what would I do if you had not been my friend? There are no answers, but what would I do if you had not been my friend? My friend. My friend.
Thank you again, Evelyn, and thank you, David, for that meditation on love and loss from falsettos, which was new to me. A couple of announcements this morning as we continue in our service of worship. First, I will state very formally here that St. Luke Presbyterian Church will be having a congregational meeting next Sunday, July 31st, immediately following our 10:30 a.m. worship service here in the sanctuary. That congregational meeting will be for the business of receiving our nominations for officers from our nominating committee. That will be our new ruling elders who will be on the session and our deacons. There's more information in print and in the email offertory. I will say that we have had a couple of deacons, for some personal reasons, need to step back from their calling, and so we are at the moment going to be heading into the fall down 2 deacons from our normal deacon size. So if you find yourself out there kind of interested in being a part of the CareNet of this community and would be interested in supporting the deacons, the main work of the deacons currently is to care for a neighborhood of folks, which usually involves reaching out quarterly or so to check in on folks, and then reaching out in times where there's a prayer request, a death, or a birthday. So it's very much an embodiment of the web of care and relationships that we strive to be here together. There's a couple openings that we would love to fill. We do have a strong team. We will find a creative way forward either way. But I know that this is a challenging year to say yes to an ongoing leadership or volunteer opportunity. There's a lot of uncertainty. But we would benefit from a couple more. If you are out there and are interested, please come talk to me, or to our outbound moderator chair, Sue Reeby, or our incoming moderator chair, Connie Branson. Next announcement, I think Nora is out probably chasing my daughter at the moment. But Nora shares that the youth room downstairs has a large flat screen TV, about 60 inches or so, which just stopped working. And they do use a lot of multimedia, especially for their confirmation curriculum, which will be starting up in the fall. If anyone out there happens to have an older flat screen TV that they'd like to donate, it probably needs to be of the larger size, and it does need to be a flat, not the big tube thing. I grew up with those, I know them. If you have one or know someone who does, please let Nora know. With that, we'll move now into the embodiment of love and loss and everything in between together, which is the sharing of our communal prayer time, a chance to honor the joys and sorrows in our lives. In a moment, I will come around with the microphone and I will invite you to share if you have any prayer requests, and you may do so. Please keep your mask on while you do share those. And then we'll together respond by saying, "This is our prayer." But first, to transition us into that time, David will help us with our centering prayer song.
In the mist of early morning, you are there. In the fading light of evening, you are there. You are there when we are joyful. You are there when we must grieve. Yes, in each and every moment, you are
To get us started, I will share two prayer requests that came in online this week. The first is from Pat Hassey, who's is going to be away with a lot of other Presbyterian folks at Presbyterian Synod School in Iowa this week. They're exploring the theme of experiencing belonging and being with each other. And Pat requests prayers that this would be a restful and meaningful time away for her. So Pat, thank you for passing this on. Let us lift up Pat to you, O God, as we pray for a restful time for her and all those journeying together to laugh and to learn. And we pray that it's a rich and meaningful experience. We turn to God in prayer as we together say, "This is our prayer." And then from Jenny Meyer, who sent in this morning a request for prayers for the family of Reverend Marlene Helgamo of All Nations Indian Church, and for that wider community. Marlene died earlier this past week and will be greatly missed. She helped St. Luke long ago get the Sweat Lodge started here some decades back. So this day in which we are honoring loss and legacy and love, let us lift up all those who loved and are missing Marlene Helgamo as we turn to God and give thanks to her life, saying, "This is our prayer." And now I'll come around for others. Adele.
I'm Adele Lenig, and I would like to ask for prayers for the people of Ukraine. They appear to be in an endless war. And I'd like to call out with particular hope the many, many citizens who have chosen to react to this war with nonviolent responses. They are staffing their own food shelves and finding ways to help their neighbors and being with the people in their block. And it just reminds me of what Mel Duncan always says, which the natural human response is nonviolence and love, and that war and violence is the aberration.
So God, we turn to you praying in sympathy and sorrow for the people of Ukraine. We pray for all those who are affected by war and violence. And oh God, we pray for peace and love. This we turn to you, seeking hope as we together say, "This is our prayer."
I'm Daryl Schmidt. Earlier we sang Abide With Me, and I just wanted to say that's a hymn that was and is very important to my ancestors and my family of origin. But Julie pointed out to me that verses 2 and 3 were written by our poet in residence, Pastor Brennan. So now this version is very meaningful to me too. So prayers of thanks for Pastor Brennan and for using all the best words.
Well, thank you, Daryl. It's always tricky when you mess with the beloved hymn. I didn't know which way that prayer request was going to go. We give thanks, O God, for ongoing creativity, the gift of making music and poetry together, and for receptive hearts and ears to embrace how music evolves over time. And we give thanks to you, O God, for this wonderful hymn, and for the gifts of words and music. Let us together say, "This is our prayer."
Good morning, Laura Elliott. So I'm sure Nora's maybe either outside or downstairs, but I will still share prayers of gratitude while she experienced her own grief this last week of having to miss camp in Colorado due to Luke having COVID. I'm very grateful that she was able to stay and be with us as we also celebrated 11 years of marriage this past Saturday on July 23rd. So very special anniversary for us. And we enjoyed a family meal out on an outdoor patio all to ourselves. So very fun time and I'm very grateful for her. And so again, while she experienced her own grief, I'm very grateful.
We give thanks that Luke has recovered from COVID. We honor and celebrate 11 years of marriage and offer our sadness that Nora had to miss camp this past week, but offer our gratitude as well for lovely family time together. We are thankful, O God, that everyone is healthy and okay this day. And so we turn to you, O God, offering our gratitude as we together say, "This is our prayer."
Talking about grief, I have to say, just the temperatures that the world has been experiencing is something that, well, it's been pretty obvious, I think, to all of us. We've all been experiencing heat. But, I forget how many thousand people have died in Europe this last week. I'm one of those people that likes to look at radar around the world and things like that. I heard recently that one of the main things that are on young people's mind today is, am I going to be able to survive to adulthood? It's a really terrible situation. I grieve for the world. I grieve for the planet. I don't know what else to say, but it's really critical. It's absolutely really critical. And I don't know what to say,
We at St. Luke have an active environmental ministry, and we'll have several offerings, I'm sure, this fall, ways to plug in, but I think importantly, here present in this moment, we just honor that there's immense grief that comes with climate change and with immense fear for a lot of folks, and with some of the loss of habitat, loss of life, and the climate disasters we're seeing. So today, we lift up, O God, a prayer of grief and sorrow as we look at the state of our climate and see fear in the future of so many. O God, we lift to you our lament, our sorrow, and our longing for hope. We turn to you and say, "This is our prayer."
Lynn Cox, as we talk today about more concrete grief and loss, I also want to bring up the concept of ambiguous loss. when you lose someone who you love very much, who's there, but they're not there. Thank you.
We honor all those who are experiencing ambiguous loss, losses that are hard to describe, losses of hope, losses of relationships, losses that are hard for other people to see and acknowledge. So we turn to you, O God, praying for that invisible cloak of love and comfort to surround and bless those who find themselves carrying ambiguous loss alone or unsure of how to reach out for support. We pray for those individuals, those caregivers, and those families. We turn to you and say, this is our prayer.
I would like to pray for our women. I was up north with my granddaughter and her best friend this weekend, and a lot of the conversation was around their fear. They both are wondering if they should get pregnant, if I have an ectopic pregnancy, if I have some birth defect, if I have some reason to worry that my obstetrician is not going to be able to save me because they have to save the baby first. And hearing their concerns, both of those young women and several of the young women in their friend group all are suffering from, and I can't remember the name of it, but it's POSI, I think, a certain kind of excess of testosterone in their systems that is compromising their periods and their menstrual cycles, and worrying about that and having to go into an obstetrician and get the best care. They shouldn't have to be worrying about this. They should not have to be worrying that anybody is going to get in the way of whatever they need to do with their bodies and consulting with their doctor. And it was just heartbreaking. So we have to pray that somehow we're going to fight against this and figure out how to get those rights back.
So God, we turn to you and pray for all of those who are facing fear and anxiety over their access to reproductive health and care. God, we turn to you, seeking ways that we as citizens of the world and as a caring, compassionate community can help be a source of relief and support and advocacy for all those. We turn to you, O God, seeking courage and clarity here in this moment. And we let us together say, and this is our prayer. And so let us, as we always do, lift up these prayers before God and each other, those which have been spoken aloud and those which reside in our hearts and across the digital platforms of which we are sharing worship. We honor them before you, our God, and before this community, as we together join our voice in saying the prayer of Jesus. Our loving God, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. Save us from temptation, and deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. And now let us rise in body or in spirit as we join in our closing hymn, O God, beyond all praising.
Praise
And now, dear friends, let us journey forward, loving fiercely, grieving fiercely, and in time, coming together as a community to journey together, to be with each other in the midst of our joys and sorrows. Let us live and love courageously together. Amen.
Oh God, you have called us to ventures where we cannot see the end, by paths never yet taken, through perils unknown. Give us good courage, not knowing where we go. To know that your hand is leading us wherever we might